Right, I'm just about to put the engine in, but I just want to tell you about this main rod here that glues in front of that secondary engine section that leads into the chain that I told you on the previous update. Now here's my rod here. It's in two parts. You've got the main part of the rod, which is 61, and then you've got the actual Y connector shape which connects onto the frame, which is 62. You glue 62 onto the top of the 61. The bottom of this 61, there's a little hole there on that secondary cross frame which I told you about on a previous update when I was putting the two halves of the frame together. That just sits in there. And then the Y piece sits on one of the pieces. There's like a C shape that sits on that frame, and the other C shape sits on this frame. Then you've got a little square notch. I had to widen that slightly and then put the glue in there, drop the glue there on the Y frame, but it kept wanting to pop back. So I got my little Vallejo model air bottle, stuck it in upside down like that, and that actually stopped that from going backwards. Now that's dry, I can now mount the engine. Now turning the plans over again, there's two notches. You got the main notch on the rod itself, which is like a T shape, and that mounts into the bottom in that square there just above my thumb. And then you got this little square notch which is on the plate. Again, I put that in on a previous update. That's the square notch there, and that mounts into that little notch there, just in front of my thumb. So I'm just going to pause this now and do a test fit. Right, my engine's in now, just test fitted, not glued. There's the one notch there, just to make it out between the two silver parts. And then the other notch is just in there. The only problem is, even though I've got it in perfect for the test fit, this is still wobbly. So when I put my glue in there and there, I'm going to have to figure a way how to stop that from moving while the glue dries. Let's see what happens. I've now glued the engine into place. I figured out to bring it forward, because what it is, I want this dead centre. So what I did is I just got my string, made a knot in it, wrapped it round the neck of that plate, and there's the actual C knot. Just pulled that through, pulled it tight, wrapped it round the frame here at the neck, and as I pulled it and pulled on the tautness, it brought it to the centre. So all I've got to do now is just take that string off. Right, before I take the string off the engine, I want to tell you about this section here, which will eventually glue onto that pin there of the motor, and the pin of the secondary motor that goes onto the chain. Now it's stage 24, which is the stage before this. You got the outer casing, which is 65 and 68. Then you got the inner workings with the chains and the sprockets, and that's part 66. And then eventually I've got to glue part 64 on. But here's what I am at the moment. There's part 68 and there's part 65. I've glued part 66 in. But before I did that, I painted the sprocket in the aluminium and the chain in the gunmetal like I did on that. The only problem is, I don't know why it's telling you to do this, because this has got to be closed up. So if I close that up, and you're not going to see anything apart from that hole there and that hole there, which again connect onto that pin and that pin. So I've just got to glue this together now. I've now completed assembly number 24, if you remember from the plans, you got the two sides of the casing, you got the inner workings with the chains and the sprockets, and then you got this 64 part which you glue on after all that's glued together. So I glued it all together, took care of the seam, re-primed it, glued number 64 on. There's a little square notch underneath there. And then once all that had dry, I masked all them holes off with some blue tack and then chromed it. Now the chrome, I've left it a couple of days to dry because I've had a few other bits of chrome pieces to spray. So then now that's ready to be glued onto that. But turning the plans round, you know about the engine, that's all been done now. Tells you to mount that on. Then you've got all this to glue in before you put that piece in. So you've got like a go-between rod between the two engine blocks, which there's a hole there and a hole there, and that glues into that bracket as well with that little Y shape, L shape I should say. And then I painted that in the aluminium. Then you've got all this that has to be glued on, which is basically that subsidiary part, whatever the hell that is, and you've got the completed kickstand assembly. And it tells you to put them in as so. But the only problem with this piece here, you've got a circular section that glued into the hole of the secondary engine part with the chain, that glues there. But the trouble is, when I glued that into place, I had to manoeuvre it round into the right position. So I thought, well, I'll go reverse, because with a kickstand it'll be in a fixed position, and then I can get this rod here into the back of the kickstand, as it says there. So I glued the completed kickstand assembly into place onto the back of those little 3 pins there, which are down the back of here. So I glued that into place. The kickstand still moves. And when I test fitted, I did another test fit of the actual front fork assembly, and it actually does balance on the kickstand, which I was quite chuffed with. So I let that dry. Once that was dry, I then glued the circular piece onto the secondary engine part, and then pulled that rod round into the right position so it glues into the back of the kickstand. So that's all lovely and dry now. And then in step 27, it tells me to glue that completed assembly into place. So now all that's done, we'll see how that glues on. I've now glued that assembly on. If you remember from step 24 with the chain in the middle. It glues onto the peg, onto the engine part there, and onto the peg that comes out, that the engine part with the chain on. So I've got my pressure clamp. The top head was there, the bottom head was there underneath, and I put a pressure clamp here as well. I put a bit of sponge on to try and protect the chrome, and left it a couple of hours to dry. Took the pressure clamps away, and you can see, I don't know if you can make it out, it's glued absolutely perfect, clicked into place really nice. But for some stupid reason, the sponge has peeled away the chrome, and this had been dry for 2 days. I honestly don't know why that has happened. So I'm going to have to get my fine sanding paper, sand all that away, and repaint it. Right, I sanded off where the sponge had peeled away the chrome with me little makeshift sanding stick with my fine sandpaper, which is sticky backed. Sanded all that off, brushed it all the dust away, and then what I did is I got some of my Alfred's Enamel Chrome spray paint, sprayed some of that in that little empty cake pot, and got my brush and painted it on by hand. And to be honest, it's only been done a couple of minutes. It don't look too bad. So let's see what happens when this dries. When I sprayed that piece in the chrome, I also sprayed that piece in the chrome, that piece in the chrome, and this piece in the chrome here. These pieces are going to be a bit further on, because in step 28, which is the step after I glued that on, you got this box here which is 69 and 71, and number 70 is the chrome piece. So I sprayed all them in the chrome, glued this into the box, took care of the seam there. Well, it's still a bit of seam showing, and then I painted that in the Humbrol Matte Black 33, and then I tested my clear that I've got. Now the cap, which sits on top of that box, I painted that in the Humbrol satin coat, and the satin coat is actually eating away at the chrome, so I'm going to have to sand that off and repaint it, but I'm going to do that in the silver. This little box here, that's going to be on the next page, so I'll just pause this a sec, which is going to be on step 29. That box connects to the outside of that box. I've painted on by hand with the 36101 clear gloss from Revell, and that hasn't reacted at all. It's still as chrome as it was before. I've rubbed it a couple of times with my fingers. There's no chrome residue. On this one here, sandwiched in that box, I spray painted that in the Halford's clear lacquer, and that's gloss. And you can see on the box that is gloss, because you can see the sheen, the nice glossy sheen. But unfortunately, that hasn't reacted with the chrome, but that has turned it a gloss silver as opposed to chrome. So it looks like any chrome parts that I've got to paint now, I'm going to have to seal them with the Aquacolor clear gloss. So just be wary if you use this spray paint or an automotive chrome spray paint. Use the Aquacolor clear gloss to seal it.